welcome and happy anniversary. It has been 3 years since we started meeting.
Wow.
Came together as a somewhat spontaneous gathering after things shut down in COVID, and then we've just kind of kept on going. And a few weeks off here and there, but I feel so fortunate to kind of have this community in my life. Today, before we dig into the soul trait of loving kindness, which is chesed in Hebrew, we'll start with a short meditation to create a sacred space, as we always do. So please relax in your seat and close your eyes. And take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And again, inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. As you go at your own pace of inhaling through the nose and holding, and exhaling through the mouth and holding. If thoughts that come into your head, just observe them and let them go. Like watching a car move past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. Right now, all you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema. And on the exhale, listen. Shema, listen. And Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. And Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. I always like that moment of opening my eyes and seeing who's here. So we have Joanne and Marjorie and Bonnie and Stephanie. So hello and welcome. I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a little after our 3-year anniversary of starting this group. So I know Joanne has been here since the get-go, I think. Nancy's pretty close, if not the whole time. And so today we're going to begin exploring the soul trait of loving kindness. Sorry, I have a couple of different slide decks that are open that are all labeled loving kindness. So hang on a second. Let me just close a few of these. There we go. So I shared some stories today of some acts of loving kindness. I was talking with someone earlier who mentioned that they had like they ran into someone they hadn't seen for 10 years or for 12 years. And 12 years ago, they kind of had a 2-hour drive with them. And this person was thinking they didn't want to have children. But after that conversation, they decided to have a child. And so they ran into them over the weekend and found out this person had an 11-year-old. And that conversation was sort of part of what impacted them. So, you know, these small, really small acts of kindness or conversations, you just never know what impact it can have on people. So I'm wondering if you would like to share maybe an act of kindness that someone did for you that had an impact. Something big, something small.
Yeah. Okay.
Marjorie.
I got a big one.
in May, well, it's almost, okay, so next month, May 4th, I have a 70th birthday coming up. And my mom, my sister, and my sister-in-law are taking me on an airplane, and I don't know where. It's a surprise. And I am like, I don't even have words to express my gratitude and how, I mean, just so how overwhelmingly wonderful that is for them to do that for me. So that fits in that category for me, definitely. So
Beautiful.
I just know, I asked if I needed my bikini and they said, just summer clothes.
Yeah, that's true. It's knowing how to pack. That's
it's really, yeah. I mean, I don't even care, I don't need, it's just so amazing. It's just the nicest thing anybody's ever done for me. Well, if I think about it, that's not true, but that's a huge one. Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Love that. Okay, Bonnie and then Stephanie.
So my dad became ill when I was right before I became pregnant with my second child, and he was terminally ill. And he's in New York and I'm in California, and he passed away while I was in my 9th month. So there was no way I was getting to that funeral. And my rabbi, who I thought was wonderful to begin with, so clearly I'm sitting Shiva without having been at the funeral. There was no Zoom in 1977. He came to the house and he said, your Shiva time is over and I'm going to walk you around the community to bring you back in. I'd never heard of that before. It had never been done when my grandparents had passed away, or I don't think for my mom or my dad when their parents had passed away. This was, in his mind, this was something that you automatically do. I was so touched by it. And the rest of that piece is that Beth David is celebrating their 60th anniversary in Saratoga, California, and I'm chairing this year of 60, and we're honoring our past rabbis. So when I called him, he's in the East Bay now, to ask him to join and be there in August for this part of the event, and I told him this story and how it touched me, because I was still 9 months pregnant when he passed away, and I'm walking around the community 9 months pregnant. And then because my daughter decided she wasn't showing up for another 8 days after that, I was still walking around the community 9 months pregnant. But how it touched me, and I don't know that it's halakha. I think it's minhag. I think it's custom, not law, but it was so helpful for me because I couldn't be there to be able to be back in my own community. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you, Bonnie. What a beautiful story. Stephanie.
Hi, I have several things that I could share, but the one that stays in my heart, close to my heart, and I'll always remember this gentleman that was my neighbor. He lived downstairs, I lived upstairs from him. He was from Denmark, and he came to United States as a young man, and he did very well for himself. He, as a lot of Danes have baking in their blood, he was a pastry chef and did very well for all of the major hotels. So I got a lot of pastry from him. And one of the things that I just looked after him. I wasn't really trying to be a caretaker for him at all. I became friends with him. He lived alone. He missed his family in Denmark, and he would often go in the summers. I would take care of his garden. I would just do little incidental things here and there. I had my life, he had his. But we became friends. As he got elderly, I kind of looked after him. And anyway, long story short, it was many years of a friendship. I lived at that apartment for 20 years. And towards the end of his life, when he needed to have more care. I asked him if he might consider going home to Denmark and being closer to his family. And of course, he didn't want to leave the United States, but eventually he did decide he would go. And it meant so much to him that he had somebody that kind of thought about him and what might be better for his life as he got older and had some health issues. And as a kind gesture to me, he sent me to Denmark. Gave me a ticket to go to Denmark. I didn't have the money to travel at the time. I always took care of his garden when he was away, and he would show me pictures of his home where he grew up. And then one day after he had moved, I felt very sad, missing his friendship. He said to me, I want you to come and see Denmark and where I grew up. And it was an amazing trip that I'll never forget. And he's no longer living, but that was very special. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Stephanie. And so many opportunities for kindness when we're really in relationship with someone. And kindness leading to friendship, leading to more kindness. It's really wonderful. Thanks so much. This is Paul or Carrie?
Mine is something that a therapist said to me. I grew up not thinking that I was very smart, but feeling that I was, but did not grow up with that kind of validation. And in my second marriage, the father of my children, it was a very difficult divorce. And I didn't feel so good about myself. And one day I was in counseling with her, and she looked at me and she said, "Do you realize how smart you are?" And I was floored. I was just floored. I said, "Nobody's ever said that to me before." And it just changed everything for me. It was a real eye-opener. It was validation that it, validated my gut feelings, and it changed my life. It really did. It would just changed everything for me from then on, about how I felt about myself, how I viewed what I did. I've had a couple people in my life, a couple teachers that had that same kind of effect, but that was really profound for me. And I am very grateful to her.
Thank you for sharing that, Carrie. That sounds like a very powerful moment. Hey, Phyllis, we're just sharing like acts of kindness that people have done for us that have had an impact. Yeah, Carrie, your story reminded me of, I had a little bit of a similar experience this week, where I was part of the team that was leading services. We do Monday morning services at my school. And so I did some singing, and I sang, and a bunch of people told me like what a great voice I had. And it was a really nice voice. And I had been told I did not have a nice singing voice. And so here I am in, the second half of my 50s, suddenly discovering that I have a nice singing voice. And so it really, really meant the world to me. I have to say, it just wasn't, I didn't think I had a terrible voice. I'd kind of figured that out because no one ever told me to stop singing, but I really just, you hear it as a kid, you hear it as a teenager from people you trust. And then all of a sudden, that's just the truth. And then that truth may not match objective reality. And so it was really, really nice to hear that. Yeah, Sue.
I just have a small thing. It's not major, but it made me think of it for some reason. This happened a while ago when I was online for getting coffee. I don't know if anybody's ever had this experience, but somebody paid for me. They took care of, I went up to get the coffee, and that person randomly had paid for me. And it's not actually a profound thing, but I always remember that. And actually I've done that now for other people because I thought, what a kind thing to do, you know, to pay for you. I just thought that was just really something. So I wanted to mention it.
Well, that's great. You know, these small acts can, you know, it can make your day. It could make, you know, it could have a lifetime impact, but it's something that stayed with you. And the world isn't always a very kind place. So these little things can really have a huge, huge impact beyond what we might expect. Hey, Joanne.
Hi. So, I mean, I think I've mentioned before that when I had breast cancer in 2011, and now with this round of chemotherapy, which I'm taking the month of April off, I'm so excited. And, but you know, there are a lot of people and different women in my community, friends mostly, and if they weren't such friends before, they are now, have been driving me to and from chemo because I can, because I have steroids, and you can't drive when you get steroids. And then something happened. I'm trying to remember, was it this past Sunday? I think so. Yeah. That wasn't so nice, and then something nice. So I'm walking because I always try to get my steps in, and there was a man coming towards me. He had a dog on a leash, but I made the mistake of looking at the dog, and the dog suddenly lunged towards me and bared his teeth and growled. So I thought it was a little scary, and I stepped back into the gutter and then lost my balance and fell forward and hit my knee. And there were 3 young women there, and they said, "Can we help you up?" And I said, "Sure." So that was such a relief. And they asked me, "Do we need to do anything?" I said, "No, I'm okay." And I continued on my way. I think I probably need to see an orthopedist now because the knee, it got better, but it's still bothering me. But be that as it may, it was just very kind of them to help me, offer to help me up and offer to do whatever. So I really appreciated that. Thank you.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the most important ways that we can be kind to other people is just to see them and to notice them. And, you know, I think, you know, my story about, you know, lending the high school girl my power cord, it was because I was paying attention. You know, I was primed to be looking for opportunities to do kind things. And so whereas, you know, I'm sure I've missed many other opportunities, but it's just very powerful when we prime ourselves to do that. And can help us do what we might do anyway. Yes, Marjorie.
You know, I was thinking about behaving with love, with acts of loving kindness. And I just find that with Mussar experience and learning, it just seems to be, it just seems to me that that is become one of my immediate reactions to situations where I don't even have to look anymore or think about like, should I or shouldn't I? It's like, I have learned it. This is what you do, because it's just, as a I don't know what the female of mensch is, but you know, it's ethically the right behavior. That's just a little sidebar that I've thought about, you know, when the topic tonight of loving kindness. And it's like, yeah, you know, it's just, I just feel so much more warmth from, you know, just being out and doing good things just because I'm doing them. Yeah, that's all.
Well, Alan Marinas teaches that when we like do a good thing or when we take an action, it sort of leaves a small imprint on the soul. And if you do that enough times, then it does kind of change who we are and we can kind of show up. And I always think of mensch as like male and female. I don't know if there is a formal female word, but it's male, female, and any other gender people might be experiencing. I think they all apply. Yes, this is Paul.
Yeah, there's something you were just saying, Greg, about that got me thinking about being aware of, in your case, aware of opportunities where you could provide something. And one thing I have become more aware of, and it's really interesting, having come home from living in assisted living with my mother for 3 months, 2 months, anyway, for a long time, had much more of an impact on me than I really expected. And part of it is because the quality of the people that they hired and the kind of people they hired were people that really enjoyed giving to others, whether it was the wait staff or the care staff, the nurses, everybody without fail was just there, and they just really enjoyed helping, mostly the elderly, you know. I didn't count myself at that time in the same class, but you know, they were just there. And to be in that environment where even the executive director had extended my stay quite a bit longer than normal because of the situation circumstances. So now coming home, I've been more sensitized, I guess, or at least it's easier for me to see when people are doing things that are kind. Whereas before I would just kind of, you know, I wouldn't want to think that, because that would be, I don't know, being raised as a boy, I can't tell. But anyway, I wouldn't want to rely on that or think that I was thinking too much of it, whatever it was. But honestly, you know, when I got home and I knew that Carrie was going away for a week and she had a ton of things to do, and yet she really, I know what the house must have been like when she was getting ready, and it was nothing like that when I got home, and just really.
You could walk through it.
I could walk through it. It was really great. I mean, more than that, it was just sort of softening up enough to see that, oh, you know, somebody, it's like they didn't have to leave a flower. They could do other things that were still very kind. So I think that's a really important piece for me anyway. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Paul. Yeah, being in an environment like that, I'm glad that you had that experience and it had an impact on you. So we have Joanne and then either Linda or Frank.
So I just want to say, I think the feminine expression that I use for is a woman of valor, Eshes Chayil, and or Eshet Chayil, depending how you pronounce them. That's what I say.
Yes, that's also a good reminder. That's another probably more common usage.
Yeah, and my neighbor has given me like one stem. You know, she probably got 3 stems of Asian lilies and given me one for the Sabbath. She's not Jewish, and she's done that a few times. I bought her, when I was in the dollar store, I bought her a pair of gardening gloves because I knew hers were old, and the dollar store, they have them for 1 minute and then they're gone. So she and I have the same kind. And I gave away some Passover food today that I'm not doing a Seder, so I gave the rabbi, who probably knows people who could use it, a box of shmura matzah and a piece of horseradish, if anybody wants that. That's my story.
Thank you, Joanne. Linda or Frank?
Yeah, I was thinking, and there's one thing that's right here at home, is that when I'm looking for something, Linda drops everything and she helps me. And doesn't matter if it's the 20th time I misplaced my cell phone or in the last month, doesn't really matter. And she drops everything. And so what that has done for us is that when she is looking for something, I drop everything and I do the same.
Very nice.
So I think, I know that when we're kind to each other, it comes back.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, let's go a little bit, and thank you all for so much for sharing these stories, and we can read like, all kinds of texts, and we'll look at a couple, but really, I think the greatest, definition is just hearing what's happened and how people have impacted. Here are some definitions for what loving kindness is. One way I think of it is leaving the path of least resistance to make the world a better place. So just in Frank's, example, it's like when Linda drops everything to help him look, that's off the path of least resistance. She could just keep doing whatever she's doing, or Joanne to buy the gloves for the neighbor, or, that's a little extra. It can be doing something for another and without expecting anything in return. And again, we heard so many of these examples where sometimes relationships form and reciprocal things happen, but it's not like, oh, I'll feed the neighbor's cat and then, hope that they'll feed my cat in return. It's like, no, their cat needs to be fed. I'm the neighbor. I'm just going to do it. And here's something that some of you are probably familiar with, a teaching from Pirkei Avot. The world rests on three things: Torah, service of God, and acts of loving kindness. So I want to talk about that. What would it mean? What does it mean that like the world rests, or the world is built on acts of loving kindness in that way? Yeah, Sue.
I think of that as a three-legged stool, and you need all of them. And the first part I think of as study. So Torah, Talmud, Mussar is study. Service of God is worship, prayer. And then acts of loving kindness is an actual, more of an interaction, a connection in relationship. The service to God is relationship with God. But it's taking it, loving kindness takes it outside. And I think more of that as a person to person relation, giving of acts of loving kindness. And it seems to me that you need all three, that they're very fundamental: to study, worship, prayer, and acts of loving kindness. And I love that. I've always loved that. And I try to live that as possible.
Thank you, Sue. Bonnie, and hang on, I gotta let the cat in here.
I'm not sure if that act of loving kindness is for you or for the cat.
Yeah, I don't know if I had to go off the path of least resistance, because he was going to bother me until he came, I let him in.
So when I look at that, yes, the three-legged stool, I also think of Na'aseh Nishma, do and then learn, because my non-Jewish friends are in a completely different world. I don't have a lot of non-Jewish friends. I've worked in the Jewish community most of my professional career. And so that's where 90% of my professional career, that's where my friendships came from, the day school and the synagogue, and the other communities I lived in. But they don't do it that way. And to me, especially working with kids, and I teach a social action class to high school students, we do, and then we learn. So why are we why are we putting together these kits, these homeless kits? Well, now we'll learn about it. Why are we making the meal for one of the programs in downtown San Jose? And then we'll learn about it. And I think that, to me, fits in to that whole three-legged stool. I don't think we need to understand why at the beginning. I think we just do.
Yeah, I think that is an important part of Jewish teaching and culture. I don't know that I would generalize about people outside, but it's certainly something particular to, or something that we focus on, is the doing. All right, well, I want to get to another teaching because this will lead us into our breakout groups. May I have someone volunteer to unmute and read this text?
I'll read. The Genesis story depicts God creating the world with a great act of loving kindness. Out of the void, we were gifted a world filled with light and all kinds of creatures. We were created in God's image and see God clothing Adam and Eve. The Talmud says, just as God's clothes the naked, so should we clothe, sorry, I'm losing, can't see.
So should we clothe the naked?
The Talmud says, just as God clothes the naked, so should we clothe the naked. Forged from loving kindness, we follow the divine's example here on earth, creating our own relationships in new worlds with acts of kindness.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, I'm going to stop the share and we'll put this in the chat.
But I have to copy it because it doesn't stay in the chat when we go in.
All right, I'm having all the cat keeps like jostling my arm as I'm trying to.
Just Greg, know please that it doesn't stay in the chat when we go into the groups. The chat becomes empty. So some of us have been copying it and putting it into notes or something.
Oh, thank you for letting me know that.
I think we all discovered it a couple of
Years ago.
sessions ago. Maybe years.
Okay, well, this isn't the one this is a lead in to what we'll talk about in the breakout groups, but what is Rabbis Perlman and Mars, Michelle Perlman and Sharon Mars, what are they sort of teaching here? What stands out for you from this passage?
Do unto others as you would have others do unto you.
Yeah, we have Marjorie and then Bonnie.
So for me, it is saying that God is already in my spiritual being is there already. And I'm just kind of carrying out what God would want me to be doing. And that's how I am connecting to God. And that's God is part of me. I am part of God. And just by doing these acts of loving kindness, God created people to be kind and loving and do for each other. And it's just kind of continuing that behavior.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Bonnie and then Sue.
I think it's a good example of us being able to emulate what God has done.
Hmm.
And it's real clear. I mean, it's something that we pray, it's something we say, it's something we learn, and we do. I like what you said, Marjorie, too. Very much so.
Thank you, Bonnie. Sue.
I agree with those who went before me. And then what stuck out to me when you asked that question was this clothing the naked. So it says, the Talmud says, just as God clothes the naked, so should we clothe the naked. So I think there's a point there about that's one of the things we should be doing in our loving kindness is clothing the naked. There's a reason that's there, that specific act. I think, I mean, that's what it's kind of puzzling. I think that's what it's saying in the middle there. And then we should be doing that, helping. I don't know if that's specifically like clothing people, like we should bring clothing to Goodwill. I mean, I don't know, but maybe I'll ask the question. I don't know if you have an answer what that's supposed to mean, but there you go.
Does anyone want to take a crack at that? Joanne?
Oh, I know it's in Pirkei Avot. And also, because it says in Genesis that God provided animal skins for Adam and Eve, once they realized they were naked because they had eaten the apple. Before that, they
Mhm.
didn't. Yeah, they're just like didn't care, like no. And also that one should visit the sick because God visited the sick. And I'm trying to remember if that was Jacob, maybe.
That was, well, that'll be the next slide, and that's what we'll talk
Okay.
about. But
Okay.
there are sort of four things. But what is clothing the naked? How do we,
I think
something literal, or is there something else? I saw Linda raise her hand earlier.
no.
Though I feel that you have to do a midrash there, all its manifestations. So I don't look at it, I look at it as a kind of a guide more than as a specific.
Yeah.
And guiding us to
Notice those things.
notice people in need.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's how I sort of take it, is it's often, and I think in tradition, it's taken to mean sort of caring for the poor. It's sort of giving people who don't have, what they need. And so it's a specific example of a more general case.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, it also talks about relationality and is, dropping some clothes off at Goodwill the same as, if there's like one of these giving tree things, where someone needs a coat and you buy them a coat and it's going to like a specific person, or you have a neighbor where there was a fire and you give them all your old blankets or something. I don't think there's nothing wrong with giving to Goodwill, but I think there's something extra special when there's some relationality involved. Yeah, Joanne.
Yeah, they do also, I know my friends who do have done midnight run also bring clothing, like warm clothing and coats along, as well as food when they do that to the homeless. And what was the other one I was thinking? Now I don't remember. Oh, one year, I guess this was during COVID, I knit a hat for this homeless guy who was always asking for money, and I was giving him something, not tons of money because I don't have, but what I could, and a buck or two. And then because he was wearing like a cotton cap or something. And then when one day I passed him and he was wearing a knit cap. It wasn't the one I knit him. And then I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if he sold that or somebody stole it, or, I wonder what happened to the hat, but I didn't ask. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know how our gift is going to be received, what's going to happen. And in my opinion, that's okay. We are giving without expecting anything in return. And often it has a big impact, but we don't know what that will be. Yes, we'll hear from Paul, and then we're going to go to the breakout group, or Carrie.
Yeah. So I'm not muted. There's a bunch of women in town that knit hats and scarves and mittens for people, and they hang them on the tree in front of the library, and anybody can take them. And we don't even worry about who or what. They're just every winter that's what's done, and it's just a wonderful thing to do. And when we were making masks, we did the same thing in the beginning of COVID, when my group was making masks for everybody. We just hung masks everywhere for people to take. So
Very nice, Carrie.
I thought it
All
was
right, Bonnie, we're going on speed round here.
Carrie, we do that at Jewish Family Services. It's called the Nitzvah group, from knitting. It's a great, I didn't create it, and I don't knit, I just donate.
great.
But it's a very clever one that you may want to use elsewhere.
Very nice. Okay, I put in the chat, and you'll want to copy this into a note since it's going to disappear when we go into the breakout. group. So this is, I think, what Joanne was referring to. There are 4 ways to practice loving kindness to emulate the divine: visiting the sick, which was when God visited Abraham after he circumcised himself; clothing the naked, which was Adam and Eve; comforting the bereaved, which is when God visited Isaac after the death of his mother, Sarah; and burying the dead, which is when God buried Moses at the very end of the Torah. So with your partner, do you practice any of these? And if not, what are some ways that you practice loving kindness? Let's see. All right. The rooms are open. Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, how were your discussions? And would anyone care to share maybe something an insight you had, or a way that you practice loving kindness? Yeah, Marjorie.
Okay. Well, something that came up for me was, we're talking about, how people on the street, there's more and more people on like freeway entrances, etc. And what I've been doing is I have like a 12-pack from Aldi. You can get really inexpensive seltzer water from Aldi's. And it still comes in 12, not 8-packs. And I typically have one in my car. And I've given them to some of these people who are on the freeway rather than money. And this man was so appreciative. And I just came to the conclusion that it wasn't so much the item or the money, but I think it was also just that this person was being acknowledged, that another human has acknowledged me because, I'm this, these people, it's really sad. But that made me feel like, the guy, he really appreciated it. And I think it was the human connection more than anything else.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, human connection. Anyone else?
Marjorie, that was helpful to me because I have this memory of being in Brooklyn one time, passing by a woman who was at a dumpster looking for food. And so I thought I was being generous by giving her 75 cents. At the time, that was worth something. And she said, "That's not going to buy me anything." And so I thought, well, maybe I won't do that anymore. But what you said about that, that's helpful. I'm gonna go to Aldi's and get some.
Joanne. Joanne, I think you're on mute.
Oh, no, I thought you said Diane. I
Oh.
didn't hear my name. Okay. And so of course I forgot. Oh, and I forgot Linda's guy is name. It only says Linda less. Let me see here.
And Frank.
Frank. So Frank was talking about getting like McDonald's, like $5 gift certificate that you could just hand out to people. I thought that was a great idea. And I'm, sorry that feeding the hungry wasn't on that list. Because I think it's really important and something a lot of people are struggling with, and I'm trying to give to Feeding America and Feeding Westchester, Save the Children, because I feel so bad. They show this, and the mother has to go out and do Uber, and the kids are fed at school, thank God. And of course, certain members of Congress want to do away with that, unless you're really, I don't know what. It's like, how can you be pro-life and let American children?
Let me just pause on the.
I know, I'm sorry. Sorry.
But
can't do that. Oh, okay. Sorry, bye-bye.
Yes, but I totally hear what you're saying about, compassion for people who are hungry and giving in that way. Absolutely. Acts of kindness. Yeah, Sue.
I focused, told the story about visiting the sick. I went to see a friend who I had trouble visiting him. It was during COVID, and I went to Shalom Home and they wouldn't let me in. And then they moved him and I couldn't find him. And finally I found him and was able to visit. It was on the Friday before he actually passed away in a home. And I remember bringing him a Coke and he liked Coke and it was Friday. So I brought a challah, but there were other Cokes, like everybody else had brought a Coke, right? But I walked in and, he was clearly uncomfortable and they were trying to lift him up for me to come see him. And I'm like, no, just let him be. But we had this visit, and what I remember, and his name is Tom Marver. He was a beloved member of our community. What I remembered him saying to me was, it's so good to see a familiar face.
Mm,
And I thought, wow, when you're in the hospital, when you visit the sick and there's all these, the other people, and just to have somebody come in that's familiar, I
mm,
think that was the loving kind, not bringing him the Coke and the challah, which he obviously wasn't going to partake in, but just being there, and he knew me and he said, oh, a familiar face. And so that was really good, I thought. And then the other story I told was, there you can, when someone dies, there's like a show more opportunity. I don't remember what it's called exactly, but I sat with the dead person, not, the dead person's in the vault, you actually see them,
yeah.
but you
Hever
sit with
Kadisha.
them. Say it again.
The Hever Kadisha.
That's it. Thank you,
I
Marge. It's
talked about my dad too. Okay.
yes, the Hever Kadisha. Thank you. Where you sit, it's a mitzvah, and it's the ultimate mitzvah because it's a dead person. They can't, they can't return the favor. It's a little joke, but not so funny. But you know what I mean? Like, no reward. That's the point.
Yeah.
The point is, you give a mitzvah with no expectation, and it was, you could you read Psalms or do any, in the room when you're sitting there, and very
Mhm.
powerful and a very loving kindness thing to do.
Wonderful example. And I've never done that, but I've known a number of people who had and said it's a very powerful experience and really a way to bring dignity to the body. And, I think it probably had origins to make sure that like animals didn't come along and, that sort of thing. But it's yeah, a way to care for the dead. And I think it does bring comfort to families as well, to just know that their loved one is kind of being taken care of, is being accompanied, kind of in their time up through the burial. Well, friends, I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I have not been on top of my calendar in terms of giving notice, but I'm going to be away for the next 2 weeks for Passover. I'm heading to the East Coast to visit my daughters and my father in a little three city trip across the East Coast for Passover. So we will meet again in 3 weeks, where we'll continue with loving kindness. But hey, that is all the longer you can keep practicing loving kindness. And so, if we're going to go into overtime, this is a good one. This is a good one to do it. So let's close our eyes once again. And take in a leisurely breath and a leisurely exhale. Give ourselves the gift of just some silence. Some quiet and peace and rest. When you're ready, you may open your eyes.